I'm not a native English speaker, so I'll try my best to translate some of the conversations to the best of my memory. The ladies' dorm stood not so far off from the technology building of my university. In my country, it's typical for a university to be located on a cramped street filled with restaurants, internet cafes, student-friendly apartments, bed space and room-to-rent vacancies. The dorm is not related to the university in any way. The owner sometimes stops by to supervise renovations and stuff. Overall, he's a good guy. This dorm stood out the most to me because 1, it's the nearest to my school, and 2, it's pretty decent for a fair price. I didn't have any problems with the amenities, the management and the staff, or so I thought. Emma, my dorm mate, is a communications major and also a good friend, until now. I'm an arts major, so we didn't have any classes together. My schedule is also hectic as hell. Most of the time I'm doing my plates or I'm in the university theatre organisation, so I'm almost never home during the weekends. My friend Emma is usually the one home, so I had the room all to myself during the weekend. It was Friday past 11 p.m. when I heard a soft knock on my door. My room is located at the end of our hallway. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone. Usually I open the door, because here's the thing. The security guy or the staff usually knocks on our door if the tenants have any visitors waiting at the lobby. It's like a routine thing and absolutely normal in our building. The norm is strict, so no one can just announce themselves at the door and say he or she is visiting someone. The tenant has to confirm. Visitors even have a curfew until 10 p.m. If there weren't any visitors, it could be a package or whatnot that someone has left for the tenant at the lobby. But that knock seemed a little off. There was just something in my gut that told me not to open the door. It's past curfew, so I can't have anyone coming to visit me. The knock continued, seemingly a little louder than before. "Yes?" I said. No reply. "What is it?" There was some silence again, then the person finally spoke. Some stuff." It was a soft, low voice belonging to a man. "What?" I said. "Stuff. Your dad left you something." I stopped for a moment. Well, it is true that my dad does sometimes stop by since he drives through my city from work. He buys me materials I need for my projects. And this person, I knew who it was immediately. It was the security guard. "You can just leave it by the door," I said. I never opened the door. My dad never comes without telling me. The way he talked and everything else just doesn't add up. The knocking stopped. For a minute I didn't know what to do. All the dorm rooms are wooden. I know the architecture isn't exactly top-notch. If a strong, muscular guy tried to barge in with all his strength, I doubt he'd have any problem getting in. I didn't know if he'd left or if he's waiting for me to open the door so he could push himself in. My heart was beating so fast. Scared as I was, I wanted to call someone, but I was out of credit. I remembered I had free Wi-Fi and decided to message my dad and a friend through Messenger. My dad didn't reply, but my friend said she's calling the police for me. I instinctively looked for something in the room to defend myself. I held a butter knife I'd just used to make a sandwich earlier. I went to a position where I could easily defend myself. Some minutes passed and somehow I felt I was calmer than before when I heard consecutive screams from outside. I listened. Numerous footsteps followed and people were shouting and talking. The whole situation was just crazy and traumatizing. This even got into the local news. Apparently the security guard knocked on another door and the unfortunate girl opened and almost got raped. He held a knife to her, threatening to kill her if she asked for help. But the girl's a fighter. She wouldn't let herself get raped and struggled against the man, attaining cuts and lashes in the process. By that time people were already aware of the commotion and he tried to escape, but eventually he surrendered to the police. The girl luckily was taken to the hospital before she lost any more blood. I told the police that I was the one who asked for them and told them what I knew about this guy, which is actually nothing. I knew nothing about him. All I knew was the security guy was fairly new, coming in after the last security guy who I heard had found a better job. The guy wasn't the chatty type, but he seemed harmless enough. He was lanky and quiet. He just stared as people came and left the gate, though a little part of me perhaps knew there was really something behind those stares. Of course I told Emma about this and even showed her a picture of the girl's room, the floor covered in blood. After a week, we moved. I felt sorry for the girl who had suffered this incident, and I heard she stayed at the hospital for months and was totally traumatized, which isn't surprising. The poor owner of the dorm suffered too. Because of the incident, many tenants moved out and the dorm's reputation was tarnished. I still get chills as I think about how observant he was for knowing which of the girls was alone in their rooms. How he used the fact that my dad frequents by to give me art materials for my plates. All this time he was just observing which of us would be the most vulnerable to take advantage of. This happened over a year ago, and writing this down makes me wonder what could have happened if I'd opened the door for him. I'd rather not think about it. This incident taught me that people aren't always what they seem to be, like that security guard. From what I heard, he didn't have a criminal record. He seemed like an ordinary salary-earning guy. Needless to say, I learnt the true meaning of not judging a book by its cover. I live in one of the most dangerous and extreme towns in the world, but I'm sure you've never heard of it. It's an isolated little place, and you need to know the terrain very well to make it safely from the last civilized place in the country to here. The natural resources are bountiful but deadly. I love this place more than anything in my life. Our town is nested on the slope of a volcano. Twice a year, on every equinox, it's required that we make a human sacrifice. This is so normal for everyone that all families have 1 or 2 spare children for that purpose. They were raised separated from the rest of the family so they wouldn't feel betrayed when the time of their ridiculously painful death came. They knew nothing but the grey walls of our basements and that they were born to die at 13, maybe 18, if there's a long line. So they wouldn't be sad that they never experienced running free across the sunflower fields, bathing in the creek, making friends, meeting someone to marry or getting a profession. They don't know such things exist, so they'll only suffer as the hot contents of the volcano tears their skin apart, when they are still alive to feel every inch of their body burning. Don't ask yourself, why impose such brutality on our own? We tried so hard to kidnap hitchhikers and lost wanderers to throw them to the volcano god. It simply spits the tainted meat along with a rain of flames that only calms down when we throw in a proper meal. From time to time, the wise men try again to feed our god an outsider. I don't think they are actually that wise. Everyone knows that it doesn't work. The last time it happened was 4 years ago. To quench our god's fury, we had to throw in 3 scapegoats at once. It really messed up the calendar and people had to breed more sacrificial children. On top of that, all our crops withered away that year. We didn't starve, but we lost so much money that my parents had to send me and my older sister Jaden to take the train and beg for coins and meals. Jaden is now married and pregnant. I still don't know if this will be a normal child or a disposable child, so I'm not thinking of myself as an uncle yet. My name is Nashi and I am 16. When I'm of age, I want to go to the city to study so I can come back home and make our fields even better. Everything grows here, despite its original environment. Our fruits and vegetables are delicious, and no one is ever sick, all thanks to the blessings of the volcano god. I had a brother who was meant for sacrifice, but he escaped, so my parents had a new spare child, B. I try not to see B as a human, but it's hard, because she's so adorable. She's 11 now and never complains about being served the worst leftovers, or how we only fed her once a week during the 6 months that our God was mad at us. I still think about my brother D. They, the scapegoats, are named after letters to make it easier referring to them without giving them a real human name. D had a huge birthmark on his collarbone, shaped almost exactly like a Star of David. The birthmark was the only way to tell us apart, since we are twins. I don't know if D was originally meant to be a scapegoat, but because he was marked to another god, everyone decided that he would make our Lord a particularly good meal. But besides all that, we live a happy life. Our sense of community is unmatched, since everyone knows very well you have to take one for the team. My sacrifice for us as a group is to care for my sister B, knowing that she will soon die. I always saw us as the only ones in the world who knows the meaning of loving your neighbour. But last week the rogues and sinners came and destroyed it all. They showed up in broad daylight, a bunch of masked men and women daring and impure. They were young and agile too. Called our town a cult, a violation of the human rights and a creepy show. They slashed us by the dozens, freeing the basement children, the disposable children, the children who, we are taught, have the honor to become one with the divine. Everyone who was strong enough used their arms and torsos to throw the invaders into the volcano. A lot of blood was shed. As the god rebelled against the spoiled meat, a new scapegoat was thrown in. We had to cut our losses. I did nothing. I'm scrawny, all brains, but not even that smart. I'm good at nothing. I just stood there and saw people who had given me their sweet corns and crispy lettuces being slaughtered like pigs. I helplessly watched my father be slayed in front of my very own eyes. As I trembled, hiding behind a wall, Mother sent me to guard our basement in her place so she could fight back. It was crucial that I didn't let them take B. So I ran, awkwardly and too tall, but not tall on the right places. I rushed downstairs, immediately seeing the shape of a man and a woman. The woman had B on her shoulder, ready to flee. My little sister wasn't kicking or screaming. She was a very good girl. A little part of me wanted B to see the world instead of painfully burning to death inside of the creamy lava, but I still had to obey my mother. I still wanted to be loyal to my town. The man had a thin and light sword in one hand, the other wrist closed, showing protruding veins that were sure to take me down unarmed. Like the others, he was awfully young, surely no more than 20. His stance said, "Come at me if you dare." Maybe I could put up a fight and hold them back enough. As the female ran upstairs with my disposable sister, I approached the man, who immediately threw me a beautiful punch. I stumbled a little but planted my feet on the ground. I noticed he was smiling under the rag that was covering most of his face. He then grabbed my arm and bent it with a loud crack. His stance was partially opened as he did that. I screamed in pain, telling myself that I needed to put my long legs to good use. My enemy clearly had brute force, but, looking closely, he wasn't well built. That man was malnourished. He had suffered through his life. As my arms seemed to break, I did my best to at least trip him and take him down with me, and it miraculously worked. We rolled on the floor, the only floor that B ever knew. The basement was clean and relatively well furnished. We're not monsters. To our family, B was like a dog everyone felt sorry for, so we gave her the bare minimum. As we rolled on the floor, I realized that this soldier wasn't made for close combat, though he was so much more fit than I was. He was already tired from fighting others, and had taken some damage. I rolled from keeping him from pinning me, and used all my will to hold his forearms, keeping him from hurting me further. On the floor he seemed unsure whether to let go of his weapon or not, which gave me some more opportunity to strike back. On a stroke of luck, I was able to maneuver the man's sword enough to wound him. It wasn't lethal, but enough to create a huge tear on his shirt. He bled on my cheek and neck. My eyes instinctively fell on his chest. He had a birthmark. Between ragged breaths he let go of me, dropped the sword on the floor, took off the cloth covering his face, and said my name, begging for his life. But he was the same man who had killed my father, who had killed my neighbours I adored, and friends who I knew better than I knew myself. So I reached for the sword, and my smile grew as I realized the man I was decollating was D. It was only after killing my twin brother that I noticed how fiercely D had fought for his life, and how hurt I was. I fell on the floor, staggered, unable to help anymore. When I woke up, I was all sore and feeling like a lot of time had passed. I was greeted by my mother's deep blue eyes, like bees, and just then I realized I was surrounded by grey, unassuming, suffocating walls. She probably didn't have the strength to bring me upstairs, but when she spoke, her voice was cold. "So I see you let B escape and killed D." "I attacked the invader like you told me. He killed Dad." "He was one of us. He was still one of us. Pure meat." Her voice grew so colder that I wanted to cry. "By now you should know what it means." The realization hit me like a bullet train. Father is dead. Mother is already too old to breed new life. Jaden is pregnant and can still bear plenty of children. Every family has a spare child. I'm not ready for this. I knew life outside of it. I'm not ready to give up on my dreams after 16 years of being allowed to have them. It was supposed to be you, Nishi, the runt of the twins. No, please, I begged, knowing that it was pointless, knowing that if I was on the other side, I'd do the same to my scared child. I'd take one for the team. We had too many losses, you know, and spring is coming. She simply stated and left. I know I'm next. What do? I don't know our exact location in the world, and it won't be long until Mother realizes I still have a cell phone with me. For now, I spent the last few hours laughing bitterly, thinking how I'd do anything to be rescued by the brother I killed. This all happened years ago, so details are quite fuzzy. My apologies. I'll try my best to recollect. So, for context, when I was younger I used to go to this summer camp almost every year. It had a really big lake and it was full of animals everywhere. I had been going there since I was around 7, so I knew the place pretty well. It was also very different from the big city where I lived, which for child me was very exciting. Well, one day I was walking from the lake back to the cabins, which were a bit far away. You had to go through the woods to get to the clearing where they were. I liked to go before the rest so I could get a proper hot shower and not the shitty ones you got after people had bathed before you. Hot water, no slippery floors, all that great shit. I begin walking the usual trail when something feels off. Just a heavy feeling of dread. I usually didn't get spooked by much, but that felt bad, just very malicious. I kept going, mostly because I didn't believe in spiritual stuff, and I thought that feeling was probably hunger or something. Then the birds began shrieking behind me. They seemed really pissed off, but I had the feeling it wasn't me, and the dread grew. I felt a hand, a pressure on my shoulder, and I just breathed in, trying not to have a fucking nervous breakdown at an invisible hand on my shoulder. I knew somehow that I couldn't show I was scared. If I did, shit would get worse, in some way. So I picked up my pace and tried to keep positive. This part is actually a bit absurd because I was wearing flip-flops and doing that weird fast walking but not really running thing people do, and the clap of the sole as I walked was loud as fuck. So that kinda made me feel less scared because it was ridiculous to be walking like that from an imaginary, or so I wanted to believe, being. Anyway, I got to the cabin fast enough, but the feeling wasn't at all gone. It was just underneath, like a constant state of alert. The bird sounds were irritating me a lot at this point, because everywhere I went they just shrieked. I was happy when it came the time to sleep, because I was 1, tired, and 2, hoping if I slept the feeling would pass. Newsflash, it did jack shit for my nerves. At first I couldn't sleep. Then I did and woke up at like 4 a.m. And this woman was just staring at me. And wailing. A lot. I just stood there for the most part, because what else was I going to do? She was wearing this long white dress, and her tears were pitch black, which I guess was a good palette, but excuse me, what the fuck? I closed my eyes, opened them again, and she was just gone. The feeling too, which was a bit unsettling. It felt like she had taken something from me. To this day I think this is a bit of a creepy memory, but it's not proper scary stuff, it's just weird. It's been a long time since this happened. I have yet no clue what that woman could have wanted with me, but I do know that at the time I was very depressed and cried almost every day, so maybe it was just my mind doing tricks and projecting stuff. When I was a kid about 8 years old, I had a really vivid dream. I've been a vivid dreamer all my life. I was walking with my mother in the courtyard of this church. I remember thinking this church was not like any other church I've been to before. It had a dark and eerie vibe. We walked down the door and went to the centre-most room facing the courtyard. There were those beads hanging in the doorway that has never made any sense to me. When we walked in, there was this old fortune-teller lady with a crystal ball and bright white eyes with no pupils. Her fingers were long, skinny, and wrinkled, and her fingernails were sharp. She pointed one of her fingers towards me and opened her mouth wide as to let out a blood-curdling scream, but everything was silent. Later that year, Halloween came, as it does every year. My family always loved going to haunted houses that people in the neighbourhood put together. This year one was called Hell House and was ironically held at a church. The overall theme was do good things and you'll go to heaven, do bad things and you'll go to hell. Typical stuff for a church. After going through Hell House, we walked out the exit, finding ourselves in the courtyard. Through all the hectic jump scares and people screaming, my mother and I found ourselves in the courtyard of the church, waiting on the rest of the family to make their way through. The situation seemed oddly familiar. After waiting some time, my mother suggested moving on and meeting up later. My dad was still inside with my sister and her friends. As we were walking, I noticed it was the same exact church from my dream. We walked down the same exact corridor and reached the centermost room. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and my mother thought nothing of it because we were supposed to be scared at a haunted house. The sign read over the door, "What's your fortune?" My mother reaches for the beads to head inside, and I grabbed her arm and told her we shouldn't go in there. She said, "Don't be silly, it's not real," and started inside. However, I didn't follow her. She stopped in the doorway and noticed I was frozen with fear and wouldn't move. She insisted no further, realizing the fear was real, and soon the rest of my family showed up and we left. I have no idea to this day what or who was behind that door, and I don't want to know. This was one of many times I've had a dream that soon came to fruition. For a long time people feared to walk a certain area of my town. It still is a rather unsettling sideway with a small river flowing next to it, and old trees throw their shadows over the whole path all day. There was the ghost of a man to be seen, who would carry a wooden fence post with him all the time. If you were unlucky enough to encounter him, he would walk up to you and ask a single question. "Where am I supposed to place the post?" while waving the post in front of him. Most people would just ignore him, scared to their bones, or reply a quick, "I don't know," before leaving the area in a hurry. The ghost kept asking until one day an outsider who knew nothing about the ghost met him on his travels. As per usual, the ghost asked him, "Where am I supposed to place the post?" To which the stranger replied, "Where you picked it up from." Having received an answer, the ghost was now free to leave. He thanked the stranger and shook his hand as a sign of gratitude. Upon contact, the man felt a burning sensation, and when he looked at his hand, it had burn marks from where the ghost touched him. After this, the ghost never was seen again. The burn marks, however, never vanished. It was the time of the great witch hunts. Many women and men lost their lives, and not even my little cosy hometown was spared. So it happened that 2 young women were accused of witchcraft and being in contact with the devil. As they were afraid of being lynched, they fled the town and went into hiding in a nearby barn. They knew that the place was not safe and their hunters would find them soon enough. So they started to feed the snakes living in the said barn, feeding them breast milk in exchange for their protection. First, the townsfolk thought they could outweight them, but after days of waiting they gave up, expecting the women had died either from the snakes or starvation. No one ever saw them leave, and even today my town's surrounding has a high amount of snakes that roam the fields and forests, leading people to believe the young women are still here, feeding the snakes and their offspring.